I have my morning meditation practice outside. And I sit and I take in the warm sun and the breeze and just a symphony of sounds. And it really supports my practice to open and to relax and to find a place of peace. And it makes me feel very contented in a way that I feel like the world is just right. It's really a wonderful way to start the day. And then in a moment, a thought arises about what's happening right now in other parts of the world. You know, we all know there's poverty, war, grief, hunger. I mean, really, in a word, there is so much suffering, and it seems like nothing in the world is right. It's incredibly jarring. And I wonder, how do I hold what seems to be a paradox? How do I hold a perfect world, a world that's full of so much pain at one time? And that's what I want to talk about today, about paradox. The idea that two contradictory realities are both true at the same time. How can that be? And how do we work with this? So in prep for the talk today, I went to Dharma Seed, where there is a huge listing of Dharma talks for any of you that don't know of it. And I did a search on talks for paradox. And I actually was really surprised to find page after page after page of talks about this. It's not a new concept. And what I really think about is that in many ways, it's what brings us to practice, these contradictions that we don't settle with. So just to get us in the mood, think about some of these things. We look for stillness in the midst of movement, whether it's a still heart in the midst of the movement of your breath, or a stillness in the world that we know is always changing. Or how about coming to the cushion because we want peace or insight or enlightenment, but our practice is to let go of wanting, to not strive, to let everything be as it is. It's paradoxical. We long for love and belonging, and at the same time, we have this urge to push people away when we feel vulnerable. There are numerous examples of paradox in the natural world. Imagine sitting and watching a beautiful pink-hued sunset and the peace it exudes. And then recognizing that that pinkness is caused potentially by particulates in the air from wildfires. So we're holding the beauty and the destruction. In our political landscape, which I am not going to go into really, is full of seeming contradictions. And we as individuals hold plenty of contrary views. So even right now, we're each alone in our homes or cars or wherever, and we're sitting together. Paradoxes, the world is full of them. So for me, the question is, with all of these contradictions, how do we find peace? The mind wants to make sense. It wants clarity. And if it can't find it, it agitates in looking for that clarity. Living in uncertainty between two truths feels really vulnerable. So the mind continues to look for what is certain in an uncertain world. it leads us to try to find a way to see the world in black and white, right? Or as either or. Our mind wants to choose one view over another because the world doesn't make sense if both are true. But we all know the world isn't black and white. If we use my initial example of sitting in the morning in the beauty and the contentment, the mind doesn't want to let in the miseries because it's such a contradiction to what I'm experiencing. And so it moves into this kind of subtle denial. We might say to ourselves, I'm just going to rest here. I'm just going to enjoy myself and save my energy. If I don't listen to the news, my life continues on fairly easily, making our circle a little small and manageable. Or the mind might take the other stance, right? It might consider all the suffering in the world and want to move to fix it. What can I do? Fixing something is such a good way to try to bring control into what is uncontrollable. Or maybe we feel guilty for other suffering or really wallow in the terrible state of the world. How can I enjoy my peacefulness in a world that's in such disarray? So you can see where I'm going. The mind wants to take a side one way or the other. It creates a duality and an other as it tries to solve these circumstances. I know we can see that in ourselves, and actually we can feel it in ourselves too. If we look closely, I can feel unease in my throat and chest when my mind is unsettled, trying to figure things out. It's subtle, but it's there. And when I'm with it, I try to use that as a great reminder to let go and find another way. So, what is another way? Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, the mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses over. Those two lines, they could be this whole talk. The mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses over. If there's an answer to these paradoxes, I think it does lie in the heart. We've been talking about the heart practices all year, and it seems here's another way and another time where it's an answer to the struggles that we find ourselves in. We're learning to let the mind settle so that we can sense a deeper learning and a deeper knowing. Because maybe the heart can embrace life in a way that the mind just can't. So what would it mean to consider these paradoxes with the heart? I have a dear friend who is not Buddhist, but she is very wise. And she said to me recently, I no longer say yes, but. I always say yes, and. It's so simple. Exchanging 2 3-letter words. Can you hear the difference? By saying yes, and, our hearts are asked to hold it all, not to rationalize, make sense of, pick a side, judge one over the other, but include it all, the beauty and the terrible in this world. Michelle McDonald, who's one of my favorite teachers, titled one of her talks on this topic, No Part Left Out. And that's what using and does. So here's an example where exchanging and for but clearly changes everything. During the pandemic, I found myself sometimes feeling anxious and isolated and caught up in feeling vulnerable, not really knowing what was safe or how to protect myself. And then my mind would diminish these feelings by thinking, but aren't I privileged? But others have it much worse. Some are working on the front lines, some are homeschooling their kids, many have lost loved ones. With the but, my mind was picking a side. I was dismissing my own difficulties because others had it worse. So instead, I could say, yes, I struggled today to find some balance in these crazy times. And others have had many challenges that I can't even imagine. All of this is true. And our hearts hold it all. It doesn't mean that I don't recognize my privilege and good fortune as well. I do. That's part of the picture too. Using and actually gives me the opportunity to feel it all. It's all stewing together. Anxiety and gratitude alongside the suffering of others. By saying and, we're stretching our hearts to try to hold it all the paradoxes, all the contradictions. Even this morning, as I was meditating outside, I used this practice. I enjoyed the beauty of the spring. I took it in and I consciously brought it into my heart. And I then thought about the suffering that was happening right now, too. And I felt what it was to hold both. Maybe only for some moments before my mind wanted to choose again. But that's why we practice, to strengthen that ability of our hearts to hold more.